Hey everybody, welcome to Earth and Time, a channel where we explore both Earth history as well as human history. And today we're really going to focus on Earth history. And today we're going to go to a place called Ouray, Colorado, where we're going to check out a couple waterfalls, talk about the unique geology that is exposed to each of them, talk about glacial geology and what carved this amazing landscape through this region. In fact, this region is known as the Switzerland of the United States, and it looks just like you could be in the Swiss Alps. Pretty amazing. So with that being said, let's go check out and learn a little bit about the geology around Ouray, Colorado. Let's get to it. There are a couple famous waterfalls here in Ouray. The first one we're going to go to today is called Cascade Falls, and it occurs along these cliffs you can see behind me. Now these cliffs are pretty old, and so we're looking at from geologic time to the time before the dinosaurs when these were deposited. In fact, most of these were deposited during the time of the ancestral Rockies, which is pretty interesting. So the Rockies have actually popped up once about roughly 250 million to 300 million years ago, eroded down, and then popped back up again, which we see today about 60 million years ago. And that's why we can see these rocks that are exposed. I think it's about a 15-minute walk up to Cascade Falls. There's our first view of Cascade Falls. There's not a whole lot coming down through there right now, but you can see how it's eroding its way down through the Hermosa Formation, and maybe the upper part could be the Cutler Formation. So these are Permian in age. So this is again from before the time of the dinosaurs, but what a picturesque spot. So one of the tricks of geoscientists is we can't always get to the top, like where the waterfall's coming down there from those cliffs. But what I can do is I can look down here and figure out what's coming from on top. So I can see things like this is a sandstone, and this is this purplish red color. In fact, you can see there's some nice clasts in here, conglomerate. It's almost gravelly, a little bit, maybe like almost like a conglomerate. And this is probably either from the upper part of the Hermosa or the Cutler Formation. And I can kind of match that color to the purples that are at the very top. If I start looking farther down, I see a lot more of these grays and buff colors. So I can go look for some of those rocks and find out, well, what are those made out of? And I come here and take a look, and I think some of these are still sandstone, but I did see some limestone in here as well. And let's see if I can find some of that. Check this out. Check out the fossils in this limestone. Can everybody see all those? Those are called crinoids, or sea lilies. So these are a bunch of ancient life forms from pre-dinosaur times. So from that, I can look up here now. We can see people for scale now that are hiking up behind this waterfall. So this is the Cascade Waterfall that we've hiked up to, and it's absolutely stunning. But you can see it's several hundred feet tall if you take a look at these people, and you can also get an idea about how thick each of these geologic units are. So these lower geologic units are the limestones where I think these fossils are coming out of. So I'm going to go take a closer look, and as we get up higher we get more into sandstones, probably more terrestrial environment. So I can start putting a geologic story together here that during this time this was some kind of shallow sea ocean time, and then it slowly transitioned as the Uncompahgre uplift or the ancestral Rockies were coming up into more of a terrestrial environment. So we can see the sandstones coming down that would have been shedding off of those mountains, probably a series of things like alluvial fans and those kinds of deposits. Really cool. We can come to one outcrop here, see a beautiful waterfall, and also learn a geologic story about this area of Colorado. So I worked my way up to this lower limestone outcrop. You can see the water coming down. We can see the beautiful cascading waterfalls coming through here. The plants clinging to the rock faces. Really, really cool. But what I wanted to look for is, can I find some of these fossils that I saw in place within this limestone? So limestone is a chemically derived sedimentary rock. So think of something like coral reefs, areas with lots of life and tropical environments. And because of that, usually we can find fossils in these, like the one I found down the slope. So far, however, I am not seeing any here to show you yet, but we will keep looking. Hold it, hold it. Look at those. So here's some coral. You can see pieces of coral, and I think these may be pieces of even maybe echinoderms as well. So things like sea urchins that are in the side of this rock. That's awesome. All right, so we're gonna work our way up a little bit more. I wanna see what else I can learn about the geology here at Cascade Falls. So I'm working my way up the Cascade Falls trail. I wanted to get to the overlook over Ouray, and there's so many things to talk about the geology here. One of the things I'll point out real quick is there's the town of Ouray. Absolutely spectacular view. You can see we're in full fall colors here, but if you look up the valley to the mountains up above, this is a beautiful glacial valley. So there were glaciers that came down through here in all directions. In fact, there's a cliff face just on the other side in the valley. We would call that a hanging valley, where there's a glacier that came down, intersected the glacier that carved out this valley going off in this direction, which is to the north. And it's a really, really nice view of this mountain glacial topography. The other thing that's up here is there's a bunch of the sandstone that's been dyed green, and a lot of it actually has iron staining as well. So this is an old mining district, and we can see that where you probably had copper and iron being deposited into the sandstone as other minerals are being deposited in the area, including gold and silver, which is what helped set up the town in the first place. All right, so I made it underneath Cascade Falls. It's nice and cool, absolutely stunning. I'm in a section still within the limestone, but if I walk up here just a little ways and I turn and I look at what's parallel to me on the other side of the waterfall, that lower section is actually a bunch of sandstone. So that's interesting. That's like the sandstone we saw below. What does that mean? That could be coming right through here? Well, there's a reason this waterfall wants to come down here, and that's because it's a zone of weakness in the earth, and that zone of weakness is a fault that's occurring right here. And I know that because I'm in limestone, this gray stuff. I look across the way at the same elevation, and I can see I'm in sandstone. The rock looks different there than it does right here. So pretty cool. Earth always finds the easiest way, and in this case, this waterfall found itself a fault zone and it's tumbling over the top. Pretty awesome. All right, let's go head on to our next stop in Ouray, Colorado. Okay, so I had to take a step back here, and there definitely is something happening different from where I was at. From the left side of the waterfall to the right side of the waterfall, I think there's a fracture network and maybe a small fault system, but I definitely don't see a lot of offset as I come down deeper in the area. However, just behind the waterfall, things are definitely fractured, and I can actually see that fracture up there. But I think I'm wrong in saying there's a good size fault, or there's maybe a main fault from the left side to the right side, because I can see pretty good continuity of the system throughout, kind of coming across this region. There is, however, I will say, a slight change from what's happening on the right to the left. What I do like is this mineralized sandstone. Look how green this is, and there's iron staining in some of these pieces. This one's just really, it's almost a chrysocolla color. So again, a copper, or I think gold ore can be kind of greenish too, and I know they were mining gold, and silver for that matter could have a greenish hue. So I'm not sure what was going on, but whatever this was, these were fluids carrying precious minerals that were being deposited in these sandstones, and these sandstones were being used by those fluids as superhighways to spread through this region. And the fact I saw what I originally called a fault, but I think it's just a fracture system here, would be a great way for those fluids to travel. These fluids that were moving these minerals around, silver and gold and maybe copper, these were all happening deep inside the earth. So these wouldn't have been, these fluids would be moving through these rocks, like this one here, when these rocks were buried at some depth, thousands of feet below where we're at today. And because this is too cute not to capture, I had to get this slow 5 miles an hour chipmunk crossing. Oh, there goes a chipmunk. Perfect timing. Made it to the next stop here in Ouray, Colorado, and that is at Box Canyon. So here is information about the Box Canyon. Adults are $7 to come in here. Children are $5. You see seniors are sinners. Seniors are $6. And 75 and over are free. All right, so here's Box Canyon. So we get an idea what this looks like. Now, the park closes in 30 minutes. I'm not going to be able to go all the way up. But what's interesting is this area does, if you remember at the Cascade Falls, I talked about the fact there's copper ore. Here's a piece of malachite ore. So indeed, there is copper here that they were finding. So here's a little bit about the canyon. So it says nearly 2 billion years ago in the Precambrian. So if anybody saw my video on Black Rock Canyon, I'll link that up here. And that was actually on the Precambrian rocks as well, over 1 billion-year-old rocks in Black Canyon of Gunnison National Park. And these, I believe, must be some of the same rocks at the very bottom. So we can get an idea about what was happening here from the original quartzite being formed. That's at the very base of this, and what would be known as the Precambrian features. And then we can look through time, how once there was an ocean here. And we saw some of those ocean deposits when we were at Cascade Falls. And then we had everything lift up here, not once, but actually it happened twice. This one's actually the lift about 65 million years ago. And then we had a series of eruptions here as volcanoes about 30 to 40 million years ago. And then about 2 million years ago, you see there was collapse of the volcano, but with that volcano came through, it left a lot of mineral ores. Now this is a site also, so we're actually gonna walk down into the canyon, take this trail down to the canyon area and go see the waterfalls. And I can hear the water coming down. Pretty spectacular. Apparently one of the big time activities here is ice climbing, and this is a place people come from all over to come to the cliffs near here and do ice climbing, obviously in the winter time. Pretty cool, and I can see why they would use these kinds of areas for that. Now as I'm walking through, there's some interesting geologic features I'm seeing right away, like these fractures and faults running through here. Not just that, but this mineralization. So this is what the miners would look for, this change in color across the rocks, and start chasing after minerals there. Also, there's a smooth spot right here, and if I look across the way, exactly opposite me, you can see how there's a steep face. This is a fault zone we're actually walking along, which is pretty interesting why the mineralization is happening here. In fact, if I put my hand right here, I'm actually touching the fault where you can see it's polished and smooth. It's pretty awesome. One thing that happens along fault zones is you can imagine as rock is sliding past rock is they get absolutely obliterated. And you can see how this is all ground up and crushed, and you'll see streaks and what we call striations. So we are walking along the fault zone, which we can see on the other side, and actually a great view of the fault zone where you can see the red rocks over to the greenish rocks on the other side. So this is a huge fault that's tearing right through here, running right across here, coming in front of me, and then running right down where I just came from the path. That's pretty awesome. I'm talking about the fault. I walked down 5 more feet, and of course, here's a sign about the fault. So at least I know I was right, and I wasn't making stuff up when I was telling y'all. But what we can see here, there's a couple stories happening here. One, here's the Ouray fault zone, and we can see the Leadville limestone is going to be stuff going off in that direction, along with sand and gravel and older sediments. On this side is the Uncompahgre quartzites over here. And what happens in a lot of these places is you'll have hot water and water working up along these fault zones, like this one, which creates this alteration. So this hot water is actually bringing minerals from deep in the earth, things like gold and silver and copper, up. But it also just brings hot water as well to the surface if it's shallow enough, and you get things like hot springs that'll occur along here. So this is a really nice picture of what's actually happening in this area. And it actually says, in Box Canyon, water surface near the Ouray Fault in a fractured zone of Leadville limestone at the creek's edge, the pipe spring flows 100 gallons per minute to the hot springs pool, which is a couple miles down or a handful of kilometers down that direction. And it gives you an idea about how important faults are here for things like their hot springs, as well as for mineral deposition. And look at this, as I start heading back towards Box Canyon Falls, you can hear the roar of the river and some signs here on that. And you can see how it's sculpted this section. Look at this. There's even a bridge way up there, which I'm not going to have time to get to because we only have half an hour till the park closes. This is spectacular. Cascade Falls, check. Box Canyon Falls, check please. And look at those waterfalls coming down. Wow. So I wanted to turn around. I realized there's a roar of water coming through these waterfalls, but I wanted to get a scale of me here with Box Canyon. Absolutely stunning. So with anybody with vertigo, you may want to watch out walking over this area, but you can actually walk down and go all the way down to the water down there. And I wonder, can you actually swim in this water? And low clearance here to get to Box Falls. Holy crap, is all I can say. Listen to the roar of that and look at that water pour through that eroded section of quartzite right there, creating a funnel. Wow, that's a lot of water. So if I start from the bottom, I hope y'all can hear me over the roar of this water just dumping out of here. Pretty darn amazing having this here. I'm really excited to check out all the waterfalls here in Ouray. And you can really get a different view of the water shooting out, coming down, carving this basically funnel or slalom through here, coming all the way down into this area. And I believe you can maybe swim. I'm going to take the stairs down and see what it looks like from down below. So I'm looking away from the falls now. I've walked down this staircase down about 4 or 5 stories to the bottom of from where we were, and you can still see the volume of water coming down, much like when you think of a power washer. This river is just power washing all this quartzite, and what that means is this river slowly marched back from, looking out in this direction where I started, the falls used to be there and they worked their way back, and you can see how it's focused and eroded through time all the way back to there. Now how much time is that? I don't know. A long time, because this is quartzite, which is pretty resistant. A lot of people have quartzite countertops, right? It's a pretty hard rock, and it's going to take a long time, even with that high pressure, to erode back. What do you think this thing is? The other thing is there's some kind of winch system here, and I wonder if this had something to do with either the hot springs in this area or the mining in this area. I don't know exactly what that is. All right, from the very bottom, you can kind of see the water coming through, working its way out is a roar, and then right off towards the town through that narrow slot canyon. What a view, what a view, what a view. And there's some cool things happening in the rocks here too. You'll see these more resistive ridges, which are a type of mineralization in the quartzite due to the faulting here. Creates this cool web pattern. From here, as I'm walking up the stairs, you can really see the fracture networks within this quartzite due to the fault zones, and the fact that this is buried very deep at one point, was once sandstone that was metamorphosed and lifted to the surface. All right, I love this. It's your fault. We're standing on the Ouray fault zone, which is what helped form Canyon Falls. And if I just turn right here and I turn around, here's the fault zone right there. You can see the fracture. I can actually put my hand on this polished surface, and we saw this on the way in. So that's pretty neat. I missed that sign when I was going in because I was too excited to see the falls. All right, we just left the Box Springs area, and in the parking lot what I can do is I can look across at the hills, and maybe something that jumps out the hills is this discoloration that makes almost like a upside down V or a chevron there. So that's a zone of mineralization that was associated with the later volcanism in this section. Now, why that's important is that is a belt of where the early miners would have come looking for things like gold, silver, and copper. They'd see that and say, there's something different happening here, and it's somewhere where we can possibly find some precious minerals. And of course, they must have found something pretty good here, otherwise the town wouldn't have been in this place. So what caused that mineralization? Well, it's actually the volcanics that came here about 20 to 30 million years ago, remobilized the fluids in this area. And when that happened, it got placed inside of these older geologic units. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today on this adventure to Ouray. I thought I'd take a look from this view. This is a great place to say thank you all. I really appreciate all of you watching, coming to learn with me. Please, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and please leave comments down below. Ask questions. I'll do my best to get back to you. I obviously am very passionate about geology. I love what I do, and I get to come to amazing places like Ouray, Colorado. So with that being said, hope you all take care.